Hi there, and welcome back to another edition of ScaleUp Radio, the podcast inspired by the entrepreneurial ScaleUp system and designed to make navigating our ScaleUp journeys that little bit easier by learning from others' experiences. I'm Kevin Brent, and this week on the show, we bring you one of our panel discussion episodes where we look at a particular aspect of scaling up and discuss it with our panel participants. So this time, it's around how we can build valuable businesses. And in the ever-evolving landscape of entrepreneurship and business growth, one principle remains constant, and that's the imperative of building for value. However you look at value, and there's many different aspects, as you'll hear. And while the pursuit of immediate profits and rapid expansion often captures the headlines, the true measure of a business's success and its ultimate legacy lies in the value that it creates and sustains over time. And in this month's roundtable discussion, that's what we talk about. We ask our panel participants to discuss what value means for them. So make sure you don't miss this or any future episodes by subscribing to ScaleUp Radio wherever you like to listen to your podcast. And you can also nominate a guest for ScaleUp Radio if you know someone with an interesting ScaleUp story. And you can find out how in the show notes. And for now, let's go across to our panel to find out their thoughts on building for value. Rob O, what are your key takeaways or key thoughts around value?
I think the section for me that, pardon the pun, added most value or was most valuable was going through sort of the various different drivers, and it was, given the ultimate objective for Chantry, I don't think there was anything massively new or surprising sort of going through it, but it just helps reinforce kind of the things that we're doing.
Yeah.
One area that we've focused on as a business to try and drive our value is the recurring revenue piece in particular. If I think back to when I joined sort of 3.5-4 years ago, the one-offs were the vast majority of our monthly income, the kind of things that were sold on an ad hoc basis, versus now we're much better at tracking and understanding, but also we're making sure that we're building our recurring revenue and have tried to productize kind of where we would have sold a newsletter, sold an article, sold a case study as one-offs. We're now selling packages that are, a 3-piece content package for X £100 rather than the odd kind of one-offs here and there. So that's been a big focus for us, and we're growing that kind of quarter by quarter, tracking that and reporting back on that. So that was a big valuable area for us, and also just again reinforcing one of the challenges that I've spoken about in the past with Chris, our MD's involvement, where we're talking hub and spoke. How reliant are you on the business owner? We're constantly working on putting Chris away from being the face of Chantry and the focus of client meetings, BD meetings, et cetera. So all of it was useful, but I think they're the two key areas that we've identified as real priorities to help us grow.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you. And by the way, that value builder exercise, the benchmarking on those 8 drivers, it's open to you guys to do anytime you like. Just let me know you'd like to redo it. And we can do it. You don't want to be doing it every week or anything, but certainly annually as a minimum is a good thing to do, and then help you to, a little bit like you've just done, Rob, which is think, okay, which one or two of those maybe are the most important to us now, and that we can work on and build on and bring those into our planning. Good. Caroline, what about you?
It's the same as Rob. The recurring revenue for me, something we've taken a bit of a knock on that over the last couple of months. So it's something that we really need to focus on. And we've been working quite hard and reached out to the whole team with this, which we've never done before. In what else could we make a recurring revenue?
Yep.
We're not getting that far with it, because I think we are ticking most boxes that we can already. But and I think the new ideas that we've got are very long term. It's not something we could do overnight. We'd have to do a lot of work to get there. But for us, that's the biggest one at the moment.
Okay, yeah. So recurring revenue in some industries and sectors is almost the norm. In like I suppose accounting. So, Ahmad, it's basically what you do, isn't it? Everybody's on a recurring, whether it be annual or monthly payments. It's a recurring expectation. That's what it is. In others, maybe more like Sue's, it's much less of a standard thing. So the challenge becomes, how do we create some element? Doesn't necessarily have to be moving the whole. It's great if we can move the whole business to recurring revenue. Obvious advantages. I think we all can see that, but it's not always possible. So sometimes it's, how could we start creating something and build on it, and so there's an element of it that grows. So in the booklet, I've pulled out 9 different types of recurring revenue models. So they may help to brainstorm. Some are more applicable to some industries than others, but there's all sorts of things in there. So from whether it be an exclusive club kind of idea to the Netflix all you can eat sort of thing, where basically, you pay a subscription, you get as many videos as you'd like to do, so content type thing, whether it be a private club, whether it be a membership model or front of line model. Sometimes even in an industry like Ahmad's, where it's accounting and it's standard, there might be another element of recurring revenue that you can think of. So is there something that can be a premium service? Is there a front of line model, for example? You can get Ahmad on speed dial sort of thing. I'm not suggesting you do that, but because that wouldn't help with the hub and spoke one, Ahmad. But is there something? So for example, in IT service, that's quite often the case. You can have a standard one with an SLA, which is maybe a 24-hour response, but you can have an extra level which gets you straight to the front of the queue. And of course, Disney with Disney World or Disneyland, whatever it is, introduced those sort of things with the front of line queue model, didn't they? So that you could have your standard ticket, but if you wanted to avoid the queues, you could pay extra, and they limit the number of those that they can sell. But that added a huge amount of revenue and bottom line, straight to the bottom line, pretty much.
We did that with our support a couple of years ago, and it's become our third best income now, and it's the easiest one out of the lot because we don't actually have to do that much work for it.
Yeah, good. Okay, so Sue, what about you? What did you take away from the ideas on value?
I didn't read it.
No, fair enough.
Sorry.
Probably shouldn't.
There's no point telling fibs, is there?
Yeah.
What are the 8 levers?
The 8 drivers. Okay. Yeah. Now you're going to test me. So the one I always start with is monopoly control, which is around truly differentiated, but where's our competitive advantage? Because if we haven't got some kind of differentiation, then a lot of the other things become very different. If we're just the same as everybody else, the others become very difficult. I mean, not different. The other aspects become very difficult. The next one is recurring revenue. So if you've got a strongly differentiated offer with a competitive advantage, you're more likely to be able to create a recurring revenue stream, because otherwise people will go, why would I commit to a regular long-term subscription or something with you? Because I can chop and change to anybody I like and get the best deal of the day, sort of thing. So there's that. Then you've got the customer loyalty. So how strong is our so that's things like Net Promoter Score. How likely are people to refer us and recommend us? Yeah, so the Net Promoter Score is a really good one with that. Then we've got the hub and spoke that was mentioned a couple of times before, where how central is the owner of the business or is generally the owner to everything that goes on? Because if we create a business that's too reliant on, let's take Sam in your case, Sue, then it's difficult for the business to survive without Sam, and therefore anybody thinking about investing or acquiring is less likely to do so. Then we've got the then we've got the Switzerland structure, which is a kind of extension of that, which is any one of key customers, key employees, or key suppliers. Are we over reliant on any one of those? So we've got too much of our business in one key customer, for example. That's part of that. Then we've got the cash seesaw. So do we have to do a load of work before we can invoice and then wait 3 months before they pay it, right? Or can we flip that in some way, or at least shorten the amount of time that the cash is tied up in the business? So, can we take deposits up front? Can we even, in some cases, charge up front? And of course, if we've got a recurring subscription model, that ticks that box almost straight away, because people are paying on that regular basis and we don't have to wait too long to get our money in. Because, of course, the longer we have to wait, the more of an anchor that puts onto our growth plan. Then we've got the financial performance itself. So how good are our margins? And how can we work on those to improve them? And can we get those, demonstrate consistent growth over time? So at least 3 years, if we think about any investment or something, we want to be able to show at least 3 years of strong financial performance in the right direction. And it needs to be properly accounted for, if you like, properly audited books, or at least properly put together books, no dodgy things on them, nothing like that, obviously. And then the final one, if I've got my accounting right, is the growth opportunities. So to what's the growth potential of this business, and what are the specific areas that we can look to grow? So what are the easy, low risk opportunities, maybe market penetration strategies, but equally, if we had a bit of investment or we had a strategic relationship with somebody else, what other opportunities might that unlock? So what's the potential? Have we already captured 50% of our marketplace, and therefore it's unlikely that we'll be able to get much more, or have we only got 1% and there's just loads still to go for? And how might we go about that? So those are the eight drivers. And when you think about them, essentially it's that combination of risk reward. How can we mitigate any risk of something happening that means the business won't continue to perform as well as it's been doing on the one side? So ownership on the owner or key individual or suppliers or whatever. Equally, on the other side, what's the opportunity so the reward bit, so the risk reward. And if we can get those two things working well together, a really resilient business with lots of potential for expansion, that's the holy grail, isn't it? That's when, and those 8 drivers really are breaking that down into 8 specific areas that we can focus on.
I kind of answered some of the 8, most of the 8, with just quick thoughts when you were saying it.
Yep.
So the monopoly, what's our monopoly control? What is our advantage? I suppose SL Shop is the one-stop shop for SL Mercedes. That's our advantage. We do everything under one roof.
Yeah.
Recurring revenue stream. Not so great there. We don't put enough work into bringing customers back year on year.
Yeah.
But, we do try to do that, but we could be better there. Customer loyalty. I think we do have quite a lot of customer loyalty. We get really good reviews. The customers that we do tend to come back naturally without us chasing them. Hub and spoke, how reliant are we on the owner? Very, very reliant. Switzerland structure, key customers, key suppliers. Not so much customers. I think we get more new customers than we do recurring customers, but we certainly have key suppliers in the parts business. But we are working to reduce the one key supplier that's a big German supplier. I think we've managed to reduce down a lot of our reliance on that one supplier, and we've started to manufacture some of our own bits and pieces, so that's good. Cash seesaw, we actually take in parts, a lot of it's bought straight off the internet or on the phone, so it's paid for up front. So, we get the cash straight away. And a lot of the bigger workshop jobs, we take big deposits before we start the work, and restoration jobs. So we don't really have a problem with debtors because we do take the money up front. Financial performance, we have really good financial records. We do need to improve our margins for sure. And we're always looking at ways to do that. And growth opportunities, I've spoken in the past about the new engineering room And we've been doing restorations over in Poland, but we don't think that's going to continue. So we're looking now at bringing full restorations in-house. So there's another growth opportunity as well. So that's what's been going on at the SL shop.
Yeah, perfect, excellent summary. And one thing I'll add actually to the financial performance side is there are in each industry there are generally some accepted thresholds at which you get different class of potential investors looking at you. So within the digital marketing. And it's sometimes it's to do with getting the business to the stage where you've got a senior leadership team, and that's surviving without the owner, if you like. And there's a kind of revenue that goes with that, which is generally £2 to £3 million sort of threshold. But equally, as you go up, you get a business that's £10 million or more turnover, then typically you'd get a different class of investor looking in, or acquirer looking. And again, it comes down to the risk. I mean, it's clearly not 100% guaranteed because nothing is. But if you've got a larger business, the likelihood is that next year it's going to still be a large business. Whereas if you've got a business that's turning over a couple of £100,000, it could disappear tomorrow potentially. So there's an element of that. Good, Ahmad. Anything you'd like to? We've had a really in-depth one on the drivers. So Ahmad, anything you'd like to add here?
So from our perspective, I think we kind of tick a lot of the boxes, and there's some things that we probably score quite highly on all of those drivers, and there's others where obviously there's a lot of room for improvement and we need to work on. So for us, what we've been focusing on is that, so generally, as you mentioned before, accounting businesses, we got a recurring business model. So most of our clients, traditionally, accounting services were paid annually once, the accounts were done, but that's shifted over the years. And now pretty much most of our business is on a recurring model. So we get paid in advance for all the work that we do. So we got two revenue streams. We've got the recurring revenue, then they've got project-based income as well. Now, in our business, we've been working quite hard to try and build up our recurring revenue so that at least it covers 100% of our operating costs. And actually, we're quite close to that now. Probably about 6 months, a year ago, we were probably like about 60-70%, whereas our recurring revenue was covering our operating costs, by 60-70%. Now we're probably close to like 95%. So I think we're nearly there now. And I was just before this meeting, I was having a chat with Elizabeth, our marketing person, and we were just looking at our targets for where we want to be by September. And I reckon if we achieve our goals by September, we should be hitting 100% of our operating costs should be covered by our recurring revenue. Right. And then it just means that all the project work that we do, essentially the revenue from that goes straight to the bottom line because it's not costing us any more to deliver that work. But generally, typically, our project work is, it could be about 30% of our overall revenue. But then for us, the goal is then not just to get 100% with the recurring revenue, but then make a decent profit as well, operating profit on the recurring revenue as well, not just covering our operating costs. And that's kind of where we want to get to, I think.
Excellent. Sounds like a really good focus. And Rob G, what would you add here?
It's a lot's been said already, isn't it? But I was looking at, I've marked two of the kind of the 9 model types where the sort of the membership side of things is something we're looking at switching over to. I spoke to Tom from B13AI yesterday about that. And also the simplifier model. So the more we're doing in the hydrogen space, we're figuring out that people don't really like touching it and don't want to touch it, but they're really interested in it itself. So expanding our operations to cover everything from kind of so the initial feasibility, but actually employing people and doing refueling for people and that sort of stuff as well. So kind of building that into a package model.
Yeah, very good. And I particularly like that simplifier model as one to think about. Exactly that question. How can we make life easier for our customers? What makes it difficult for them at the minute? How can we take that away from them and ease their minds as part of that as well potentially? What do we take away from the discussion or the theme around value? Let's see. Who wants to start? Matt Parsons, do you want to kick us off? What are your takeaways?
I've listened to many a podcast around value, isn't it? And I think what we perceive value is not always what the buyer perceives as value. I suppose value doesn't have to be monetary either, I suppose, but when I see value, I'm looking at what I'm building the business up to be, where I want to go, how I'm going to provide that value to the buyer, essentially. So what my exit plan's 10 years, and what that's effectively going to look like. All the things I've heard around about is make sure that the business can run without me in it. So make sure you have a successful management team that effectively is going to come with the business, who's going to run it the same way that you successfully have been. Average customer value being a very important key. That what generally keeps your clients paying you and what they averagely spend with you. Yeah. It's obviously not all financial, but obviously profit, what you're turning over, what value I suppose a buyer can also bring. Making sure you're being really realistic with your P&L as well. So obviously take into account obviously what you're paying yourself, and saying that you might be generating £250,000 worth of profit doesn't generally mean that you take into account your own dividends and the additional costs that someone's got to replace you. That effectively that's going to come to it.
Peter, what would you add to that?
I think the thing I took was that there's multiple facets to valuations, and buyers can look for different things from different companies. So it could be they're acquiring your customers, it could be they're acquiring your people, it could be they're acquiring your processes or market position, and there's different ways to get to the kind of valuation you want. So when I looked at mine, I thought my obvious exit is to sell to a competitor, but actually it could equally be to sell to a customer at some point. So it's you've always got to bear in mind. Yes, there's all the bits that make you valuable, but also to get the valuation you want, you might sell to somebody that's buying you for a different reason to what you originally thought.
Great, I think that yes. So you're building on the theme that Matt was saying, which value can mean many things, and it can mean different things to different people. Absolutely. So it could be that, exactly as you've said, it could be that somebody's really what is the thing that a potential acquirer, if that's what we're talking about, that's only one reason why we're building value is to sell. But if that's the reason, what is it that they might value most? And therefore, what can we build that? So in some cases, it's purely financial. In other cases, it might be that you've got something strategic about you. It could be the types of customers that you've got. Could be some IP that you've got within the business. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you. Hugh, what would you bring in here around value?
I think pretty much the same as already been said, but it's multifaceted, and people interpret value in different ways. So it doesn't always have to be about pound notes. It could be about the value that you've built within your business. It could be along the lines of your employees. It could be all sorts of different things. And sometimes it's easy to beat yourself up because you look and think you're not turning the level of profit or turnover, but actually you might have invested so much in infrastructure and in staff as well. And by bringing in staff, they bring value as well, which could be like different thought processes. So yeah, it can be quite broad.
So how, if that's the case, if it's quite broad, how do we make sure that decisions we make have got value in mind? Claire,
you got your key drivers, haven't you? If you know the direction your business is headed in, you've got a strategy, then you've got your key drivers, and then they're almost like what you need to accomplish that.
Yeah. Okay, good. Claire, anything you'd add to that?
I just started out on this journey, so I'm really learning about that. And actually, while I was on holiday, I did actually read the report, Mel. I read the report. So I'm really kind of learned quite a lot. But one of the things that is I know that I need to do that I haven't done so far is almost like setting up all my operating procedures. Sounds a bit probably wrong, but kind of my processes and getting them down so that if something happened to me tomorrow, then all those processes could be followed without me being here. Because at the moment, it's pretty much all in my head. Yeah. And I think that will almost like devalue the business when I come to move on, sell it, whatever. So that's one of the things that I've taken from that as well.
Very good. Okay, good. Amanda, anything you'd bring in here?
Yeah, I think with our company, it's not so much monetary values, it's about the core values of the company, so that we ensure that We're sticking to those values for the children when we price it with the local authorities, that we're always coming back to the values that we've set within the company, really. So it's not really monetary with us. It's about the staff. It's about the children. So it's about setting those values and making sure we stick to them, really.
Yeah, very good. Sam?
When I read through the book and what have you, just slightly different, I was a bit confused by the impact of multiples.
Okay.
And I didn't quite get to grips with how you can control that.
Okay.
So, you know, you said you can multiply, you know, assuming it's 3, you can multiply by 5 and all this. I just didn't get how you control that.
Yeah. Okay.
Or how you figure that out. So,
all right, good. So
it's quite complex. It's quite a lot to think about, really. You know, when you think about your businesses, you can get quite, I'd say.
Suzanne, we'll come to the multiples thing maybe in a minute if people would like to. Suzanne, what would you add in here?
I can relate to quite a few different things that have been said there, and I think there are so many layers and different meanings of what value is within a business. And I think especially for us, because we've almost reformed and putting our foundations back down, like what we said last time, I think you've got like your value of your business in the long run for if your goal is to sell and how you're building that up to get what the results that you want. But I feel quite strongly at the moment about within our business that two different sides to value, where you're actually your service and you and what you provide and what you are about within a business. The customer looks at value as in monetary and what they're actually getting from what you're providing, and actually making sure those messages, what your message you want to support what you offer, matches potentially what they want. And if they don't, maybe they're not your type of customer. So I'm looking at it, values on quite a few levels.
Yeah, good. So picking up a little bit what Amanda was saying about the core values of the business, and then making sure they align with the way that you provide the service to your customers. Yeah,
I think to support what you're offering as well. Yeah. So maybe that. Yeah,
very good. Jeremy?
A controversial view here. I don't think about value at all.
Okay.
For me, I think value is a byproduct of running a good business, and I think about running a good business very deeply. So ultimately, you know, the value that the business will derive will come from the business practices that we espouse in the business on a day-to-day basis. That said, having run through the kind of the notes and stuff this morning, the one thing that did spring out to me immediately was the Switzerland structure. I've learned from a very tough experience in the early days of Invoco, when Invoco and a sister company, there were kind of 3 of us running these 2 businesses, and turnover of just over £2 million at the time. So it was a very kind of profitable business, but in a niche environment with a very small amount of customers. And there was kind of a regulatory change in the UK, which meant that basically that market disappeared almost overnight, kind of within the space of a fortnight. We went from 2 million turnover to almost nothing. And that really kind of taught me a lot about making sure that we've got a resilient customer base. So the goal with Invoco 2.0, if you like, was to build a customer base that didn't rely on the kind of the whole 80-20 rule and being too reliant on too many customers. Interestingly, now we've got very kind of detailed stats on that. Despite the fact that that has been our goal over the last kind of 15 years, when you look at our customers, actually they still do conform to the 80-20 rule. So kind of 80% of revenue is from 20% of customers, which kind of really surprised me when I drilled down into the figures. But those 20% customers is a much bigger customer base than it was previously. So it's interesting how that 80-20 rule always works. You just can't escape it.
It is interesting, and that Switzerland structure is all around over-reliance on 1 or 2 key individuals if it's in the business, or 1 or 2 key customers if we're talking about customers, or 1 or 2 key strategic suppliers. So if we can be held over a barrel, basically held to ransom by any one individual customer or person, then or supplier, then we've possibly got trouble coming. And it is interesting what you said about that 80% being spread across lots of customers, because I learned a big lesson in the pandemic, actually, because I always thought about it that way. You know, if it's we've got 15% of our business or more in one customer, then that's over reliance and whatever. But even if you focus on a sector, which we often talk about as a benefit of something to do, but if that sector as a whole comes under a real problem, then of course you might be at risk. And we know with the pandemic that was completely out of the blue and really couldn't really have planned for that. But some sectors like hospitality and retail, businesses that were providing services straight into that, of course, pretty much collapsed overnight. The customer base pretty much collapsed. So even though those customers might have had thousands of small customers within that sector, the whole sector went down. Yeah. Okay, good. Paul, how about you?
Yeah, I guess a lot's been said around valuation and stuff. So a different perspective for me is just, I always see that value is perceived. Like I've seen it where like a customer who I don't expect to pay X will pay happily without any quibble, and then another customer I expect to just not even blink at it will really scrutinise the X, Y, Z. So value, whether someone's buying your business or whether they're buying a product or service, they are constantly evaluating that exchange between what they're prepared to pay and the value they perceive they're going to get as a result. Because it's always a gamble, like wherever somebody's ordering or buying, they're always assuming they're going to get one thing and you're going to deliver something else. But for me personally, value of my business is nothing to do with selling it. It's every day is about lifestyle and it's about time, and time's my biggest asset and also the thing that I cannot replace. And that's the thing that I value more than anything is flexibility. So like that's where I put it. So the reason I set up my business and the reason I work for myself is just I want to be able to, I don't see school runs as an inconvenience. I see them as a way to connect with the kids and things like that. So like, I basically turn into a taxi every afternoon. And I'm happiest when I'm a taxi. So I think it's about value for me is I only want to really work on projects and with clients that energize me. I only want to work with a team that energize me. I only want to spend my time doing the things that energize me. And when things drain me, that's where there's almost like a massive imbalance. And then to do all that, the value I get out of the business fundamentally is then cash to then spend more time on the things that I enjoy with the family. So value for me isn't about a figure on a P&L that says I might be able to exit in 3 years, 5 years. It's more about almost living today and going, well, how much time I've been able to spend on the business. I'm nowhere near where Jez is at in terms of like, the business still runs around me. I am an employee. I am not a business owner. I'm an employee. But I think that's the value that I get out every day that I don't believe I'd get anywhere else if it wasn't for just having my own business and setting the rules myself. That's the value exchange that I get.
Very good. Excellent. Mel, anything you'd like to add in here?
Well, Paul took the words out of my mouth really, because I'd written down, what is your business giving you now? And what do you want from it day to day is as important as where you want it to be in 5-10 years time, because, you need to enjoy the journey and the experience as well. But also as well, the good news is, right, because when a couple of people have said it's quite overwhelming. I know we've got these 8 key drivers of value, but the good news is that if you're focusing and working on one of them, it will automatically impact and improve the others because they're all interconnected and all interrelated, really. So that's the good news. So don't be overwhelmed. It's going to be absolutely fine. Claire, don't worry. You haven't read the report. Yeah, all really good comments, I thought, from everyone. Different perspectives on value.
Great. So I think you as people were talking, and we're talking about the personal side of it as well as the monetary side and those sort of things. I think it all comes down at the end of the day to the balance between risk and reward. If we're talking about a strategic acquirer for your business or somebody buying your business, then they want to make sure that the risks are as minimal as possible, and they want to make sure that the upside is as big as possible. Equally, if we're talking about working with a customer and they're deciding, Paul, whether they want to work with us, then they want to know, they want the risk taken away, because as you say, there's no guarantee. So what can we do to take out make them comfortable that actually we know what we're doing and that we're going to do a good thing, and what's the reward, what's the benefit of them working with us. And actually, if we think about value in those two simple respects, then you can start to think about, okay, well, how do we break that down? And if we're talking, and as Mel referred to the 8 drivers and Sam was referring to the multiples, if you look through those 8 drivers, most of them are around making a resilient business and taking away the risks. So one of those risks we've talked about already with the Switzerland structure. There are some risks in there about over-reliance on key individuals or whatever. Equally, there's over-reliance on us as the business owner. As Matt said right at the very beginning, if we create a business that, and Claire was saying as well, if we create a business that basically is all in our own heads, then somebody coming along says, well, that's a big risk. So is that business worth anything at all? Because if Claire runs off, then what's left? So that's one of them. And some of the other drivers are also then around the opportunity side. So there's growth in there. What opportunities are there for growing the business? But it's that balance. And when we come to, if we talk about the valuation bit, Sam, there are rules of thumb, and different sectors have different rules as to multiples. So you can do complex valuations, and I'm going to ignore those. You can do net present value and discounted cash flow, all sorts of things. And that's what will be done properly. But back of the envelope, people talk about multiples. So if you take in the accounting world, typically people will pay a multiple of 1.1 times the gross recurring fees. So if you've got a client base with £1 million of gross recurring fees, then that might be worth 1.1 million, typically. Okay. Most sectors will come with a rule of thumb valuation that's a multiple of essentially what's left at the bottom. So EBITDA, so earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization. But that's basically like a net profit with a few adjustments to it. So they pay a multiple of that. And if you take across the world, that multiple is typically around about 3. But if you have a business that has almost no risk in it and a huge upside in it, clearly somebody's going to pay a bigger multiple. And one way of getting a business in that way, but equally the opposite is true, as you just said, you can get less than 3. That's just an average. But if we work on, and we break it down and say, well, what are the elements of risk in a business? And we work on those, and what are the ways that we can increase the opportunities of this business, then essentially we're shifting that risk-reward balance, and somebody looking at it might well be prepared to pay a higher multiple. Does that make sense, Sam? Yeah. So that's it at its simplest. But as Peter was saying at the beginning, or implying, that can all get trumped by somebody that says, you've got a Rembrandt and I want it. Yeah. So if you've got something really unique about your business that a particular other company might really, really value, then they might say, you know what, I'm prepared to pay a lot more for that. And which is why, if we do the two things of working on those 8 drivers over time and making the business as resilient and as robust as possible and capable of exploiting opportunities as possible, and we think about, if we do want a big exit at some point, as Peter was saying, what kind of people might want to buy us, then we can maybe think, what is it that they would really value in us? And have we got that now? Or is it something that we want to develop or develop more of to really strengthen that aspect, so that in 5 years' time, when they come knocking or when we go knocking, we've got a much better chance of ticking their boxes.
I find it fascinating that Paul's perspective on valuing a business around his flexibility, because I've always thought the fact that if I wanted an easy life, I could earn probably just as much money going to work for somebody else with none of the stresses and strains, rather than running a business. So my aim goal is to try and maximize the value of this to effectively fund my exit and retirement, and to hopefully retire early rather than working and paying into pension and paying all the loads of tax and all the rest of it, and having it as a benefit that I do have elements of flexibility, but my end goal is to increase the value as much as I can to have a suitable exit. Because if I wanted that flexibility and ease, I think I'll just go and work for somebody else, because then I've got paid holiday. It doesn't matter. I can move whenever I want to. I've got no stresses and strains. I've got little to no responsibilities. And that's where I come from, where obviously Paul's very different. And I found that's really fascinating, to be fair.
Yeah.
But would you, Matt, would you have those things if you went and worked for someone else?
Well, I think today's a very different world, though, isn't it? I think today you have the ability to have flexi time. You've got the ability to work from home more than ever before. So if we're taking about 10 years when I first started the business, it was very regimented. We were all in offices, weren't we? Working from home wasn't as acceptable as it is now. Whereas it's a very different world now. And I think everybody's the level of expectation of, like, especially when we're looking to employ and things to actually work from home. So those flexibilities and things that we get as business owners, which is always was seen as a positive, I think more employees have more abilities to be flexible than ever they have done before.
I think there's a real shift in favour to the employees, where it was very much an employer scenario. But ultimately, even if you say like, oh, I could go and do that, you're still employed by somebody else. It's still not your decision. You're still not, there's that. I don't know about anybody else, but I just think that fills me with dread, working for somebody else.
It's that word control, isn't it? You've got it, even though running a business is really hard and we can't control everything, but to a certain extent, we live and die by the decisions that we make, don't we?
Yeah.
Whereas if we're working for another company, however good we are, there's always that risk that we might get made redundant for whatever.
Oh my God, totally. And I think that's even worse, because you are making decisions yourself. But I have so many friends just are so vulnerable all the time, and to be living like that, actually, I think is sometimes worse.
Yeah.
But that's personal. Some people then don't want to have the pressure of making those decisions themselves.
And generally, you get to choose who you work with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
So it's that freedom and control, really, isn't it? Which I guess Paul was really talking about when he was talking.
It's a bit like the fisherman anecdote, isn't it? Where they say, we'll teach, you can do this and then you can do that. And then all he wants to do is fish. And then he builds a massive business so that he can fish.
Yeah.
It's like he was doing that first off.
Yeah.
I've
told it really badly, but you know what I'm on about, don't you?
Yeah, but Paul, I think I really love the concept, because you are actually doing something which is really important to you now as well. And it obviously is working. And actually, if that's enriching your life now, rather than actually, no disrespect to anybody else, but if we're all aiming at that 5-10 year flag in the sand, that's great to have those goals. But what we're missing out along the way.
Yeah. I've also seen, I've been in my past history is when I was like, I guess like a senior management position in employed in companies before I went 13 years ago and owned my own businesses. I've been in those situations where everything was about the exit, everything had VC money, and it never materialised, like 3 times, never got to an exit. So what's always in the back of my head is, I might not be here tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's genuinely that. Do you know what I mean? I have no idea. So the idea of painstakingly, and I'm not saying this is what people do, but if gearing everything up to this, like one day I'll get there, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
I agree.
I think it's really good. And so bring it full circle. The first thing in anything of this of running a business, of talking about the value of everything is understanding our why, isn't it? We go back to the Simon Sinek sort of idea. What are we in it for? And exactly as you say, Paul, we can all have this wonderful idea of some huge exit, and that's great to strive for, but the chances of it happening are realistically probably quite small. So let's
it's also that thing, isn't it? That fundamental thing is, okay, so you want an exit. You want an exit for, you want to get loads of cash. So what do I want loads of cash for? Spend time with my family.
Yeah.
It's the fisherman's story. Totally the fisherman's story.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not prepared to work 8 hours a week to then, like, I've met people along the journey who've given me like loads of warnings that like, the kids didn't know him. Like they grew up to 18 and the kids didn't know him, who his dad was, because he was there. He was a father figure, but he was working in London 3 days a week or whatever, and he was doing the corporate life, and they just grew up without a father. I'm like, that's the thing that I'm not fair to, you know, like I might work from home, but I don't want to be the door's shut, you can't come in.
Matt, I'm going to start with you. What's your takeaways from your perspective on what value means to us?
The takeaway was when I was looking at it was the second section on the value score and its drivers, and I was thinking about how that was applicable to our business. And I felt like I could tick a number of the boxes, except for the first one, which was around monopoly control.
Right.
And I think I don't have an answer to this, but I was trying to think about how if ever I was looking to sell or create further value, how would I be able to demonstrate that? Or because there's a number of players in our market, none of them are ever going to have monopoly control. It's that piece around diversification or making yourself a bit more unique. So that was the key takeaway that I got. I felt the other bits we were doing quite a good job of ticking the box of or along that path. But that one, that positioning piece is something that internally we've been talking about as well. How do we stand out a bit more from the crowd? What do we have to do to make ourselves different fundamentally?
Yeah, that's a really good question and observation. And for my money, it is the one that if we can crack that and we can build that up over time, many of the other value drivers come into play. They just follow suit, basically, because if we can really create that monopoly control, then we've got a bit more control over how we price things. If we want to put recurring revenue models in, we can do that. We've got a little bit more control rather than being dictated to by either our competitors or our customers or suppliers. We've got that element of control. So yeah, absolutely, really good. Chris, what about you?
So we've got 3 areas that we need to work on. One is the recurring nature of our contractual income, or building more contractual income. So we've got recurring income, but we're not contractually tying everybody in. So it has been raised that we move from a monthly rolling contract for new clients coming on to a 12-month initial period, which I think would over time start to obviously filter through the business and add value to a potential prospective future buyer. The next point was to do with me. I'm still too involved and too important in the business from a strategic creative director type role in the marketing area of the business anyway. So we're desperately trying to get together a job description and job spec to try and then recruit someone who could take those elements of my role away, because obviously if I'm still heavily involved, that reduces the valuation of the business as well. And then the third one was around our clients, the decision makers within our clients' businesses, not necessarily being involved in the daily operational level of the service offering, and therefore not recognising the value we deliver, which has popped up twice recently in conversations. So they don't realise how much work is going on. The operational people do in their business, but they don't, and they're the ones that make the decision. So it's how we get them to understand it. Those are those 3.
Really interesting. So a couple of different takes on that. So that is interesting, because we had it literally yesterday on another smart board, where the people that last issue that you mentioned, where the people that are actually that commission the project and that are responsible at the end of the day for deciding whether it continues and paying all the bills aren't involved on a day-to-day basis and are not seeing all the work that's going in. So when spec changes and other work needs done, they're going, why are we requoting? Why are we paying more for this when all of those. So it's demonstrating value up the up the chain as well is a challenge and really important. Good. John, how about you?
So in my industry, the key area for value in my business, my commercial business, has always been that sort of reoccurring income. That's the management stuff. Yeah. And that's the bit that we have grown, but it's very difficult to grow that side. So in the last 6 months, we've changed very much our strategy. We used to be very much looking for management property only within Worcestershire. And now as a team, we are now realising that's a bit naive. We probably need to be extending our geographical area to cover 2-3 hours distance from probably Worcestershire. So that's the bit that we've worked on a little bit. But that's the other departments I have, when it comes to actually defining value, if we were bought tomorrow, we wouldn't get much for those other, they're very much hand to mouth. So, you know, lots of people will say to me, gosh, you must be doing well. You've got lots of boards up at the moment. That's not of value. That's something that somebody's unlikely to pay a lot for. If we managed a lot of properties, then that has value really. So, that's the area that it's been my focus. We've done a bit on, Kevin and I recently, on a 10-year plan, but unfortunately, Kevin, from those meetings, I'm sensing that those two guys that were with us last Friday are not actually going to long-term want to do a management buyout. So I've got to start thinking now about adding value so that I can pass this. And it's literally in the last couple of weeks I've thought about it. And what your exit strategy might be. And there's a couple of things some good things in there. And one of the things that you'll see and people are doing is, as well as an overall value for the business, that's generally derived from looking at the different revenue streams and profit streams and calculating on that. And if you can do complex valuations with net present value, discounted cash flow, all of those things, and those will be done for the bigger purchases. But typically you end up with a rule of thumb, which is around a multiple of some sort. And what we see is people are applying different multiples to the different elements of the business, so different revenue streams. So you would get a greater multiple for any of your recurring revenue streams from any of your ad hoc ones. So you will get a value for the ad hoc, but it won't be as much as it would be for the recurring side. Definitely. But equally, what you just said there as well about the exit strategy, because value, yes, we're going to. Clearly, the financial elements of the business are a key part of the value, but also thinking ahead as to a future exit, as to what is it? Are we looking to be acquired by somebody? Well, if that's the case, what kind of companies might want to acquire us, and what is it that they would value? So going back to Matt's point, what's the monopoly bit that we've got that they'd be interested in? Because then you start, just like I guess with properties, John, you've got rules of thumb for property, haven't you? But every now and then there's something that is just a bit unique, that there's something that somebody really wants, and they'll pay more than the typical value that might be out there. And that's the same with businesses. You can have rules of thumb, and the financial elements will be the key elements of those, and those 8 drivers that Matt was referring to. But every now and then there'll be something that a potential acquirer wants so much that you've got, that you'll end up with a higher valuation than you would have otherwise done. So trying to put yourself in that mindset early on so that you can identify what that is, build to that, and potentially also over that time start to build the relationships with that company, so that actually you're on their radar. Good. Dave, what about you? What would you add to this?
Yeah, very relevant, Kevin. I mean, I must have about 6 or 7 clients now, kind of half an eye on exit. I guess you get to that stage in life, don't you, where your clients are kicking on a little bit. But interesting, I've got a client who's 30 selling his business. And it's a bit like Uber, really. It's naturally owning. I think it's a rent-to-rent portfolio. So he's renting properties from another person to then just sell them on. So he's selling essentially intangibles. He's got nothing to sell. It's interesting. I think that, from my perspective, people sitting there, accountants come in and look at, so they do the financial due diligence and they look at the numbers. But I think the biggest thing I find is if the owner's prepared to stay around, they get a bigger multiple. So the conundrum you've got really is some business owners shouldn't stay around and some don't want to. But I think if you've got all your ducks in a row, even your smart 90, you've got your vision, you've got all your kind of, your employees are set in, you've got a rhythm in place, it makes you so much more marketable. And the people that think about exit, I think, 4 or 5 years before they need to get there, they can just sit down and say, well, look at my business, really, the employees are great, we've got a strategy in place, it's all great. But I think if you're on the back foot with the whole thing, figures say a lot, but ultimately, you'll get a lot more if you've got a robust business in place. Yeah. But just having gone through it, really, it's a great thing having a business owner around. It's a bad thing. That's the key thing I'm finding now. Business owners just want to escape and get rid. But it comes with a higher multiple if they can stay around for a year or two.
Yeah, and in some sectors that's truer than in others. In service businesses, it's quite common that the founder would need to stay on for a period of time. In some other types of businesses, manufacturing type businesses, more product-based businesses, it's less of a requirement. But even in the service industries, if we can create a business that doesn't mean that we need to stay on, and we can justify why, therefore, we might have a short handover period, then that's clearly a great thing to do. And it's part of, it's a challenge. It's not easy, but it is a part of it. And as you say, Dave, there's pros and cons to the original founder staying on for a period of time within the business once it's transferred to a new person. Yeah. Granger, anything you'd bring in here?
Just a couple of thoughts for you. So Matt was talking about monopoly control. You can get monopoly control on your message and your branding and who you are. That can make you different in the marketplace. We often think monopoly control is just about our product, our service, having patents, etc. But actually, your messaging and that can really make you stand out and be different, and give you that monopoly control around that. And the adage, the person who can spend the most money on advertising wins the client. Coca-Cola versus Pepsi. Very, very different. Around that, and the other bit was in one of my other smart boards. One of my clients, he's an accountant, and 10 years ago he read Built to Sell, which was the book that then drives the value builder process and the systems around all of that. And he set out to build a business based on those principles. And he was taking us through that he's not planning to sell, but he just had somebody approach him. And for an accountant, he was offered 1.5 times, which is evidently significant for an accountant around that. He's, at such a high valuation, he's like going, oh, maybe I don't know, do I keep it or do I sell? But if you use the principles, even with an accountancy type firm, you move up that value chain and get that higher valuations through what you do. So it really does work. He was taking us and he walked us through literally this booklet in our smart board of what he's done against each one of those elements to create that. So it really does work.
And that's 1.5 times gross recurring fees, as opposed to that's your top line for accountants in that. Yeah. And Dave, you've got a bit of experience in that, haven't you? And the methodology is changing a bit, isn't it, as well? In the
world? I mean, it's a seller's market, really. Lots of cash around. Accountancy is attractive, I think, because obviously underneath the bonnet, there's lots of services and lots of financial data for clients to get into. But I think ultimately it's 1 point. So it used to be typically about 1.2. That sounds like a really great business Granger. So 1.5 is fine. But I think ultimately as well, if you work on they normally take £100,000 off for getting somebody in a consultant, but ultimately EBITDA times by 5, really, it comes to the same figure. If you've got a good business, 1.5 or 5 times EBITDA gets to the same amount, really, more or less. But yeah, good multiples.
Yeah. And his statement was, I've built a boring business. He actually said, because that's why he's not tempted. He don't think he'll sell, but he said it just runs itself now. He said, I need to do something else anyway. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that gets the other challenge as Yeah, and Dave might be smiling here, but yeah, then what? Where do you get your kicks? Where do you get your satisfaction from solving a challenge? Is that? But it gives you that option, doesn't it, to find that elsewhere, or to think of the next thing that you might do once you build that kind of business. All right, good. And the monopoly control thing, what Granger was saying there, I like to view that as competitive advantage. What's the source of our competitive advantage? So it's not just monopoly, because monopoly control does make you think, we've got to have a patent, or we've got to be the only people that offer this thing, and whatever. And that's great if we can do that, but most of us aren't in that situation. So it's, how do we build up those walls around us? How do we create a competitive advantage which we can sustain over time? That means it's hard for a competitor to eat and nibble away at what we're doing. So when you see that you've got a competitive advantage, you're generally either able to charge more for an equivalent kind of service, charge more than your competitors because there's something that people will actually pay for, or you'll be outgrowing your competition because people are seeing that you've got there. That's from an offer perspective, but it could be something internal that means that you're actually able to make superior profit. So let's take Granger's example, the lean example he was referring to earlier on. If we can have such an efficient operation where it takes us 3 days to get to the point of onboarding a new client versus 15 days that the competition is doing, then clearly we've got an internal competitive advantage that we can build on and leverage. So it's not just about, is the product itself totally unique? There's lots of other things that come into that, but it's being clear about what is the source of our competitive advantage and how do we leverage that and grow that. I hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if you're building and scaling your own business, you might well be interested in our book, The Entrepreneurial ScaleUp System. And it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's a practical handbook around scaling a business in a structured way. And you can order a copy on all your favorite online retailers, including an audio version, or you can find it and other supporting resources on our website, www.esusgroup.co.uk. That's esusgroup.co.uk, which is esusgroup.co.uk.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.